God said,
speaking of
let's
once in a
move
generation.
on. Right. Well, Rob's known her since she was 16.
Yes.
I've known her since she was early on writing in Detroit. And it is great to have her on. She's become a superstar. She writes for The Atlantic, staff writer there. Also the host of Jemele Hill is Unbothered. That's the hot podcast out right now. Jemele, welcome to the
What's
Odd
up,
Couple.
Jemele?
Hey, what's going on, guys? Thanks for having me.
It is great to have you on. And happy Martin Luther King Day. And let's start there. Why don't you just tell us, I mean, you've been a person that I think you don't mind talking about race. I think.
and not only that, but you're thoughtful about it and you think about it, and that's why we really wanted to have you on today. So just give us your thoughts.
Great day to have you on. But what does Martin Luther King Day mean to you, and what do you think, in where our country's at right now in that context, what do you think about it?
Well, I guess I look at it this way. I mean, I think we all came up through school with a basic understanding of who Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was. But as I got older and I wanted to know more and became more curious, the more I learned about Dr. King, particularly in the 3 to 5 years, I would say 3 to 4 years, not 5 years, 3 to 4 years before he was assassinated, the respect I had for him, if it was possible, it actually tripled, because that's when you learn that kind of post-Nobel Peace Prize that Dr. King was quite radical. And especially right up until his death, some of the things and some of the problems and issues he discussed, which really centered so much on economic injustice. It was very eye-opening and was a window into who he was. And I think I've also been able to read a lot of things that have talked about the weight of what he was carrying, as in not just the weight of the people, but for as much as we thought we knew about how much he was antagonized, how much he was threatened, what his life was like, I'm just astounded, and I'm grateful that he was able to still stand as tall as he did, despite the fact that he really lived his life like a moving target, the last couple of years. And to supplement that, I also have read Coretta Scott King's biography, which is equally eye-opening about what they went through as a young family, what they went through as a couple, and just a lot of different things. So I feel like now, at this point, I have a full picture of his life, and it allows me to appreciate the full breadth of what he was and really come away from it with the firm understanding that he may be the greatest humanitarian this country has ever produced.
And Jemele, we started the show off talking about him, and Chris and I both, the people who gave of themselves, who knew what was coming, the dogs, the water hoses, people spitting in their faces at the Woolworths counters and all the other stuff. And today, and there are a lot of people who stand up for the right thing, but we're so bothered or annoyed at the small things when people really put up with a lot to change the world. And now you got so many people who just, they don't want to be inconvenienced. Do you know what I mean? It drives me crazy when I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think we live in a different time, mostly because a lot of the rights that those people you alluded to fought for, a lot of them, a lot of, the people before us who were brutalized so that we could live in a certain level of comfort today, that's kind of what changed. But the thing that didn't change was a lot of the things that they were speaking about. There were some things that were much more blatant, but I think while there has been sort of some incremental progress in the sense of, there is no, at least legal segregation. We know that there is kind of an unintended segregation that's happening in our country right now. It's just, to me, the power of racism has been how it's been able to redefine and reinvent itself through generations. We went from slavery, then it reinvented itself and became Jim Crow. Then it reinvented itself again and took on other different nuanced forms of institutional racism. Today, the greatest level of racism we're probably living under is mass incarceration. So it keeps on coming back. And so part of the reason why it does is because as much as we like to think because we have some freedoms that maybe our parents didn't fully enjoy throughout their entire lives, and certainly not our grandparents, the reality is that all the things that Martin Luther King Jr., all the things he marched for, all the things he he stood against, they're still as vibrant and as prevalent today as they were 50 or 60 years ago.
Jemele Hill of The Atlantic joining the Odd Couple. Jemele, you had I thought was a great and really interesting tweet today saying, you're watching all these people who criticized Colin Kaepernick for a nonviolent protest, and obviously he's still suffering the consequences of that today, not being in the NFL. But these people who criticized him are praising Dr. King for being nonviolent in his protest. Can you expound on what you meant by that?
Well, I think we're going to probably see this with Colin Kaepernick. I say this all the time about him. Watch how the story changes. And you guys have covered sports a long time, and you've seen how people are remembered differently than in the time, and how everybody has a revisionist history. I think we're going to see the same thing with Colin Kaepernick. 20 years from now, everybody's going to swear that they stood by him, and we know that's not true. The NFL is going to change their story drastically. I really predict this. And so to that end, the same can be said with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Right before his death, nearly 2/3 of this country had an unfavorable opinion of Martin Luther King Jr.
Now, they believe a lot of black folks.
Yes. It wasn't just limited to white people. Everybody has, of course, read or even heard how unfavorably for a long time Malcolm X looked at Martin Luther King Jr. He considered him an Uncle Tom. And during that time, most Americans had an unfavorable opinion of him. They believed that his fight for racial justice was hurting race relations more than it was helping it. And years later, I think part of the reason why they have sanitized just how hated he was and and his message and what he stood for is because people are uncomfortable with the fact that the very system he was railing against and fighting against, they were a party to, they benefited from. And that's why it's very easy for people to have the cognitive dissonance between Colin Kaepernick and Martin Luther King Jr. I'm not saying that Colin Kaepernick is the humanitarian that Martin Luther King Jr. was. He's a humanitarian in his own right. But what I am saying is that the reason why it's easy to celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. today is because we know he was right. And people don't understand, you get a lot of opportunities before history proves something right to prove what you really stand for. Don't stand for it when everybody else is already on board.
That's easy.
That's easy to do, right? It's really, right now, I mean, not to get too, apolitical, but right now some of the things that we're seeing are too political with our government, with how they're treating undocumented workers, how they're treating black and brown people, period. Right now is the time where you should be standing up. Don't wait till 20 years from now when we see what is the collateral damage of everything that we're seeing happen in the climate today. And so it's just easy for people to take these stances when they see everybody else on board. You saw the same thing with Muhammad Ali. How many people loved him, particularly once he became ill with Parkinson's, but when he was standing up against war, who was standing with him then? That's when you know the people who are not just really down, but people who really understand what's at stake.
No doubt about it. Hey, Jemele, we would love to have you on. One of these days, you should come by and hang out with us in the studio.
Definitely.
I know you're busy.
Look,
we'll do that.
I'm waiting. I'm just waiting on my Eventbrite or send me a little invitation.
In other words, it's got to be an official invitation to her assistant. So we get it.
Hey, Jemele, one last thing. We got like 30 or 45 seconds. How in the heck are you a San Francisco 49ers fan coming from the D? How? You're not a Lions fan?
No, come on. First of all, I love myself too much to ever be a Lions fan. Secondly, and Rob, you spent many years in Detroit, so you know how that goes. But my mother, I was actually conceived in San Francisco, so my mother brought all that Bay Area 49ers love back to Detroit with her. And so I got influenced by it, and the Lions were terrible. They were awful when I was growing up. The 49ers are on the rise, so I just kind of stuck with the 49ers and haven't let go since the early 80s.
No, that's fair then.
That's fair. It's nice that they made the Super Bowl, but they going down in a couple weeks.
Nah.
My homeboy.
Bet him some Jordans. I already won a pair. Go ahead.
I'm done betting Jordans.
Bet him a pair of Jordans.
We bet some wings.
Oh, see, you don't even want to go. You not with Mahomes.
I told you I'm gun shy on the Jordans.
Okay.
I spent $200 on him.
Hey, I won a pair of Jordans from the World Series. He's still hurting over it.
All right, you let me know, Chris, if you want to put some oomph behind it.
Is that what you want? So you really want some? All right, let me think about it.
Oh,
I'll text you.
Okay. Look at this. Let me think about it.
Hey, Jemele, thank you so much. Continued success.
Definitely.
You know we love you. We do.
Okay, bye, guys.
All right, Jemele. Peace. Was MLK Day, when you think about it, Martin Luther King, not just the day, but Martin Luther King, what are your thoughts that immediately come to mind?
Just the whole idea that the life that we live now, Chris, and the things that we're able to do, and the stuff that we've been able to achieve, and live, where we live, schools, the degrees we have, all that stuff, when you think about it. I think sometimes you just get caught up in life and you think everything was always like this. It just wasn't. It really wasn't when you hear the hardship. I think I've told you this before. My dad grew up in outside of Orlando, Wildwood, Florida, and he would just always say to me, "You don't know how lucky you are that you're growing up in New York and how bad it was, and we couldn't leave our neighborhood, and the cops would harass us, and the white people in the neighboring towns would chase us, and you just life was miserable. It was miserable, and I think people lose sight of that. And
My mom grew up in the segregated South.
You know what I'm saying?
Separate water fountains,
the whole 9 yards. You can't even imagine that now.
Everything. Bathrooms. Yep. No, I think when I think of Dr. King, everybody obviously thinks about him as a Black American hero and what he did for African Americans and people of color.
Sure.
He is an American hero, and he did a lot for white America too. He made white America more humane and made white America get closer to the principles that it has always espoused in the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, all of the documents that we praise that made this country what it is. America wasn't living up to them. Land of the free, home of the brave. But blacks are in slavery, blacks are in segregation, blacks are second-class citizens.
But if you look at someone,
so we shouldn't think about him as just a guy that did a lot for black people. He did a lot for all people in this country because he cut away some of the hypocrisy. Right. Not all of it, but legally he cut away racism, and that made white America better, not just black America, white America as well.
No, I don't disagree with that. And I just think of the amount of things that have changed, some good, but we still got a long way to go, Chris. Question. And you notice even as guys, I've been followed in department stores, and
you've been stopped for no reason.
For
right?
no reason. I was stopped once 6 times in suburban Detroit in three months. Chris, you know what I mean? Some people never get stopped 6 times in their entire life.
Right.
And they would just
say,
for no reason. Like I never got a ticket. I never got a ticket. They would just, let's see if there's something on them, or let's just mess with them to see what's up. Those things still go on.
And that's bothersome. What's happening, y'all? It's Chris Broussard.
I'm Rob Parker.
And we are
The Odd Couple. Check us out as often as you can on YouTube.
And always remember, I'm Oscar, and he's Felix.
Oh, man. Are you serious?